Clark, I wanted to talk to you about those kids you threw out yesterday.
I wasn't looking for no tattoo. I was doing the hoochie coochie, my friend.
Certain cats and family members that I idolized, you know, just was the ones that, you know, I guess, you know, society would say, you know, those are the bad guys. Those are the ones you wanna, you know, do different. But you know.
Jermaine Hopkins just told all the secrets he's kept for decades are darker than anyone imagined.
They would go to the roof sometime and, you know, they'd throw a body off of the roof.
Wow.
So, and at that time, that was like straight off of some Superman.
Brick City. Bodies dropped from rooftops. The crack era was at its peak, and while most kids were trying to stay in school, Jermaine was just trying to stay alive.
My problem growing up, you know, I was always excited and into the bad guys.
Then, Hollywood called. He took the role. But the streets came with him. The same block that raised him nearly buried him.
I had a shooting accident, basically, where I got shot in the leg.
Then there was Tupac. Hopkins knew him, worked with him. But to this day, he hesitates when his name comes up.
We in there freestyling, rapping, and Pac would just kill it.
From child star to near collapse. What really happened in the years Hollywood stayed silent? Let's find out. Growing up in the notorious projects of Newark, New Jersey during the crack epidemic of the 1980s was no easy feat. For Jermaine Hopkins, survival meant navigating a world where violence wasn't just common, it was expected. Before he became the actor we know from classics like Lean on Me and Juice, Hopkins was just another kid trying to make it out alive from what locals called Brick City.
Newark it's got its name, the Brick City, because of all of the project developments. You know what I'm saying? It was almost like a project development town. So with that, and you know, with the compiling of so many people right on top of each other, yeah, you get, you know, it gets a little rough, a little chaos.
The chaos Hopkins speaks of wasn't just typical urban struggle. It was life-altering trauma that would shape his worldview forever. As a young boy, he witnessed horrors that no child should see, events so disturbing they seemed pulled from fiction rather than reality.
They would go to the roof sometime and, you know, they'd throw a body off of the roof.
Wow.
So, and at that time, that was like straight off of some Superman.
This wasn't something Hopkins heard about secondhand. He saw the aftermath with his own eyes, a reality so jarring that his young mind could barely process it as real.
The whole vibe of it, you know, not knowing like when is somebody gonna throw somebody else off of the roof or whatever the case may be, you know, crackhead hit the scene real hard.
For Hopkins, the projects became a pressure cooker of violence and drug trade. While his mother tried desperately to keep him on the straight and narrow, Hopkins found himself drawn to the very elements she wanted him to avoid.
My mom really tried her best. My problem growing up, you know, I was always excited and into the bad guys.
This fascination with anti-heroes wasn't just a childhood phase. It was a foreshadowing of the path Hopkins would walk, straddling the line between the entertainment industry and the street life that never quite released its grip on him. The irony of Jermaine Hopkins' life story is that his first big break came playing a role that hit painfully close to home. In the 1989 film Lean on Me, Hopkins portrayed Thomas Sams, a high school student struggling with crack addiction, the very substance destroying his real-life neighborhood.
Cutting class and smoking crack, Mr. Sams, is no mistake.
No, sir. It wasn't me, sir.
But how does a kid with no acting experience suddenly find himself starring opposite Morgan Freeman in a major Warner Brothers production? The answer lies with his stepfather, a Tuskegee airman named Joloffe Miller.
Thanks to him, that, you know, he seen they was having an open call audition for Lean on Me. And they was looking for real street kids that never had been to acting school, never had any kind of real, you know, training. They just wanted real raw talent.
Initially uninterested in the opportunity, Hopkins reluctantly went to the audition, mainly to please his mother and stepfather. What he found was a line that wrapped around a New York City block twice.
And I tell my mom, I was like, look, Mom, I don't want to stand in this line. There's so many people. Like, the line was around one of these New York blocks like twice, you know. And I said, Mom, I don't. She was like, well, you gotta, you know, show some appreciation.
But fate stepped in when screenwriter Michael Schiffer approached him in line.
Michael Schiffer, the writer, he also wrote Colors, came up to me and asked me what would I do if Joe Clark caught me in the hallway, and I was supposed to be in class. I told him the same thing that was on the script, but I hadn't seen the script.
That audition was never supposed to be his. The role was written for someone completely different, leaner, more gaunt, someone who physically looked like they'd been chewed up by addiction. But Jermaine Hopkins brought something else into the room that day. Pain, authenticity, and a rawness that couldn't be faked. He didn't match the description on paper, but his performance on camera made casting directors pause, then nod, then fight for him.
Man, you got this role because not so much of your look and fitting the description of a crackhead. That was the biggest part of the role until we met you.
That truth cut deeper than any monologue could, because Hopkins didn't just act, he remembered. He remembered what it was like to walk past broken bodies, to hear mothers scream from windows, to see childhood friends disappear in the streets of Newark. His performance wasn't fiction, it was testimony. The producers took a chance, and soon he found himself on set with Morgan Freeman, a man he'd only ever seen in films, now sitting across from him, calling him brother, helping him block scenes, read lines, and find truth in each one. Director John Avildsen, the same man behind Rocky, recognized that Hopkins needed more than just a script. He needed mentorship. So he pulled Freeman aside and told him, help him, show him what this is. What followed was an informal masterclass in acting. Not in the classroom sense, but in the quiet, deliberate way Freeman would invite Hopkins into his trailer during lunch, share a meal, and dissect a scene. Hopkins didn't come from theater. He didn't understand marks, lenses, or dramatic pacing, but he understood struggle, and Freeman knew how to mine that. They worked through lines together, fine-tuning the emotional rhythm of each exchange. Freeman taught him about stillness, about the power of not acting, but reacting, and about using his real pain, not hiding from it. Hopkins would later admit he didn't quite understand the level of greatness he was surrounded by. He was too busy staying in the moment. He showed up, said his lines, trusted his instincts. He thought he was winging it. What he didn't realize was that he was crafting one of the most gut-wrenching scenes in the film. A young addict perched on the edge of a rooftop, ready to jump. That scene would become iconic. Not because of clever writing or dramatic effects, but because Hopkins cried real tears. Not on cue, on memory. The set became his school, the camera his mirror. And after Lean on Me wrapped, the producers weren't finished with him. They saw potential, something far beyond the role of Thomas Sams. They started a management company, Fair Shot, and made Hopkins their first client. That move would pave the way for his next chapter, a film that would push him deeper into the streets, deeper into character, and directly into the orbit of a rising star named Tupac Shakur. By the time Jermaine Hopkins auditioned for Juice in 1991, he had one successful film under his belt with Lean on Me, but nothing could have prepared him for the experience of working alongside a young, hungry actor named Tupac Shakur. Their first encounter came during the audition process, where Hopkins quickly realized Tupac was a force to be reckoned with, both as an actor and as an MC. The audition rooms became informal freestyle sessions, with actors waiting for their turns to read for parts. It was here that Hopkins first witnessed Tupac's remarkable talent as a rapper.
Pac would just kill it. And that's when I realized that, all the rapping I thought I could do, I cannot do.
Unlike the structured environment of Lean on Me, the Juice set created a completely different atmosphere. Filmed primarily at night throughout the streets of Harlem, the production had an energy that blurred the line between work and celebration. The nighttime shoots, especially for scenes like the DJ battle in the club, created an authentic party atmosphere that energized the cast and extras alike.
We did Juice. Hey, Juice was like a party. We filming all night.
For Hopkins, now approaching his late teens, the experience offered a new level of independence and maturity. No longer required to have his mother on set as he had during Lean on Me, he found himself navigating early adulthood while working on a film that would become a cult classic. This newfound freedom allowed him to form deeper connections with his castmates, particularly Tupac Shakur. As Tupac was just beginning to make a name for himself in the music world, Hopkins was drawn to his confidence and talent. Their friendship quickly extended beyond the set, with Tupac showing the younger actor the ropes of nightlife in New York City. These outings were often learning experiences for Hopkins, who was eager but inexperienced in adult social settings.
I remember the first time me and Pop went out. He, I bathed me, took me with him, and because I'm like, man, I always wanted to be a rapper, man. You got this rap around your finger, man. Take me with you.
But Hopkins' role in Juice nearly never happened. After securing the part but before filming began, a shooting accident almost derailed his career. While visiting family in North Carolina, Hopkins suffered a gunshot wound to his leg. Fearing he would lose his role, he initially tried to hide the injury from producers, claiming it was a football accident.
I had a shooting accident, basically, where I got shot in the leg.
When his story unraveled and producers discovered the truth, Hopkins desperately pleaded to keep his role in the film. The alternative, returning to North Carolina where he had been laying bricks to make money, was something he desperately wanted to avoid. Fortunately for Hopkins, the producers decided to take a chance on him, allowing him to stay with the production. Juice went on to become a defining film for both Hopkins and Tupac Shakur. More importantly, it was the beginning of a friendship that would have a profound impact on Hopkins' life. Through Tupac, he gained not only a mentor in the entertainment industry, but also someone who would guide him through the complexities of fame at a young age. This period marked a significant turning point for Hopkins, not just professionally, but personally. His experiences on the set of Juice and his relationship with Tupac would shape his understanding of the industry and his place within it. However, this newfound independence, combined with his continued success, would eventually lead Hopkins down a challenging path that would threaten everything he had worked for. After Juice, Jermaine Hopkins' acting career was on a steady incline. He managed to maintain visibility in Hollywood through a mix of film and television roles that showcased his versatility. In the mid-1990s, he appeared in the beach-themed comedy Fat Beach, and later took on a more prominent role in Def Jam's How to Be a Player. He also enjoyed success on the small screen, especially with his recurring role as Dupree on The Wayans Brothers, where his comedic flair earned him praise from audiences who had grown up watching him play more serious, dramatic characters. Hopkins had seemingly accomplished what many young black actors struggle to do, transitioning from childhood roles into adult performances without falling into obscurity. But while the public saw a familiar face on screen, few understood the internal battles Hopkins was facing. Beneath the surface, he was carrying the weight of unresolved trauma, environmental conditioning, and perhaps the unrelenting pressure to maintain relevance in a cutthroat industry. By the time he reached his late 30s, these pressures boiled over in a way that would shock even his most loyal fans. In December 2011, Hopkins was arrested in Arizona in connection with a large-scale undercover drug sting. Authorities alleged that he had attempted to purchase an astounding 200 pounds of marijuana from an undercover officer. The quantity alone raised eyebrows. This wasn't a simple possession charge. It was the kind of arrest that sent a clear message. Hopkins wasn't just dabbling, he was allegedly operating on a level that could be classified as facing a potential 5-year prison sentence. His future as an actor and public figure was hanging by a thread. A conviction of that magnitude would have not only derailed his career, but permanently altered his image in the public eye. The perception of Hopkins as the wisecracking, relatable teen from Lean on Me and Juice gave way to headlines focused on criminality and disappointment. Yet somehow, Hopkins avoided the worst possible outcome. Instead of years behind bars, he received a comparatively lenient sentence, just 30 days in jail, followed by 3 years of probation. For many, it seemed like a second chance, a moment of grace that could have allowed him to turn the page. Some hoped this brush with the law would be a wake-up call, but as time would reveal, it was more of a warning sign than a turning point. In October 2017, 6 years after his Arizona arrest, Hopkins once again found himself in trouble with the law. This time, he was pulled over in Apex, North Carolina, for speeding. During the stop, law enforcement officers searched his vehicle and discovered nearly 6 pounds of marijuana hidden in the trunk. Though the amount was far less than in his previous case, the incident suggested that Hopkins had not completely distanced himself from risky behavior or the networks that facilitated it. What made the situation even more haunting was the location. Apex was close to the same area where Hopkins had been shot years earlier, just before landing his breakthrough role in Juice. That eerie coincidence underscored how closely his Hollywood narrative remained tied to the shadows of his past. In court, Hopkins once again managed to avoid jail time. Instead of serving up to 4 months behind bars, the judge suspended the sentence in exchange for 24 months of supervised probation. Another legal bullet dodged, but the underlying issues remained. Fans and observers began to ask the difficult question: why would someone who had achieved so much throw it all away not once, but twice? For many, the answer pointed back to his upbringing. Hopkins was raised in an environment where drugs and crime weren't distant threats. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. Fame may have elevated him, but it didn't erase the psychological scars or the survival instincts learned in those formative years. These weren't just bad decisions. They were echoes of a life Hopkins had never fully left behind. To truly understand how Jermaine Hopkins rose to fame and why he later fell into legal trouble, you have to go back, way back, to where it all started: the housing projects of Newark, New Jersey. This wasn't just any tough neighborhood. It was a place where kids grew up fast, survival was a daily mission, and hope often felt like a luxury. Jermaine didn't just witness the harsh realities of the crack era. He lived in the middle of it. The drug trade wasn't a story on the news or something happening far away. It was on his block. It was what people around him did to survive. And in one raw, unfiltered quote from Jermaine, he makes it clear how normalized that life became. Crack was like a whole different charge. You get more time. So we just sold the defense to do it. Probably the worst thing was like when we out there, when stick-up kids came. In other words, they tried to avoid the more serious charges by staying in certain lanes of the drug game. But even then, the danger was constant. Stick-up kids, armed robbers, would come through, and violence could erupt at any moment. It was a war zone disguised as a neighborhood. Hopkins has talked about seeing bodies thrown from rooftops, something most people couldn't imagine witnessing once, let alone growing up with it as part of the background noise. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear when someone hands you a movie script or puts you on camera. It sinks in deep. And here's the tough part. Even when opportunity knocks, it doesn't always erase the past. When Jermaine got his big break in Lean on Me, playing Thomas Sams, a teen caught up in drugs, it felt real because it was real. He wasn't just acting. He was channeling memories, people he knew, things he saw, and maybe even parts of himself. That authenticity followed him into his next big role in Juice, where he played Steel, another character surrounded by crime, loyalty, and tragedy. Again, Hopkins wasn't drawing from imagination. He was pulling from experience. He understood how young black men in poor communities are often pushed to choose between being victims or becoming what they fear. But here's where the story turns. Unlike many of his peers back home, Hopkins did get out, at least physically. Acting gave him money, fame, and a whole new world to explore. He was rubbing shoulders with legends like Morgan Freeman and later Tupac Shakur. He had what most kids in the projects only dream of. Yet mentally and emotionally, he was still tethered to that old life. That part never really let go.
You know, certain cats and family members that I idolized, you know, just was the ones that, you know, I guess, you know, society would say, you know, those are the bad guys, those are the ones you wanna, you know, do different.
And that's where the contradiction lies. One minute, Hopkins is starring in classic films and being managed by movie producers. The next, he's being pulled over with nearly 6 pounds of weed in his trunk. Then again, years later, this time with almost 200 pounds. It's easy to say, why would he risk it all? But for someone raised in survival mode, the answer isn't always clear-cut. People who grow up in poverty often carry a mindset shaped by scarcity, mistrust, and the constant need to hustle. Fame might change your address, but it doesn't instantly rewire how you think. Hopkins himself has admitted in interviews that he always felt more comfortable around what he called the bad guys. Not because he wanted to be a criminal, but because those were the people he understood. People who didn't judge him, who spoke his language, who shared his past. And there's another layer to it. For many child actors, success comes fast and hard. They're given money and recognition at a young age, but not always the guidance or structure to manage it. Hopkins was just 14 when Lean on Me came out. By 17, he was filming Juice. He was growing up in front of cameras. But behind the scenes, was he really being taught how to navigate fame, pressure, and temptation? Probably not. So when you take all that into account, the trauma of his upbringing, the sudden fame, the lack of a safety net, and the pull of old habits, his legal troubles don't look so random. They look like the result of an internal tug-of-war. The boy from the streets versus the man Hollywood was trying to shape. But Jermaine Hopkins' story is far from over. Despite setbacks that might have permanently derailed another actor's career, he has found a way to remain connected to the craft that first saved him. In recent years, he's returned to the screen in independent films like Equal Standard, 2020, and Asbury Park, 2021, reminding audiences that raw talent, when nurtured, challenged, and given the space to grow, doesn't disappear. It endures. But his path to redemption hasn't been without struggle. Hopkins' legal issues, including 2 high-profile drug arrests, threatened to eclipse the promise he showed as a teenager. Yet rather than allowing those moments to define him, Hopkins has leaned into his truth, acknowledging his missteps while continuing to push forward. His life, in many ways, mirrors the very characters he portrayed. Flawed, human, trying to navigate a system that often feels rigged against people who come from places like Newark. From witnessing bodies thrown from rooftops in his youth to sharing the screen with giants like Morgan Freeman and Tupac Shakur, Hopkins' journey is filled with both glory and pain. He once said, "It's all in how you play your part." And perhaps that's the most fitting metaphor for his legacy. He played his parts with brutal honesty, never sugarcoating the realities of black urban life in the late 80s and early 90s. His performances in Lean on Me and Juice weren't just scenes. They were mirrors, reflecting a generation's pain, struggle, and hope. At 52, Jermaine Hopkins is still writing his story. It's one of survival, redemption, and enduring cultural impact. A legacy that continues to resonate with those who saw themselves in his work and who still believe in second chances. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.